What's going on, everyone? We're now through with the opening slate of the first round of the MLS Cup playoffs, which features these best of three series. So all the game ones are over with, and we have 8 series to cover. It was relatively smooth sailing for the most part for these higher seeds up until the final couple games of this first kind of match day, so you want to call it. And we started with Inter Miami, the Supporter Shield winners, the record-setting points team, taking on Atlanta United in their first game in Fort Lauderdale. Straightforward for the most part, 2-1 victory. I think the scoreline didn't really reflect how many chances Miami had, but they still got the job done, and they go over to Atlanta now for the second game. Then we had LA Galaxy with the most lopsided scoreline in the entire first round, with just a blazing 5-0 victory against the Rapids, who are completely falling apart at the seams from the stretch of the regular season towards the end, and now to begin these playoffs as they are also dealing with a couple injuries. That series will shift to Colorado now in game 2. And then we had Orlando City, the 4th seed in the East, taking on the 5 seed Charlotte. They made Charlotte look pretty pedestrian in that first game. It was a 2-0 victory at home, so they handled their business, and now they look to close it out in Charlotte. LAFC took on the Whitecaps in what has been a pretty regular feature in the playoffs recently in the past couple of years, and they handled business once again with a 2-1 victory, continuing their dominance over Vancouver. Cincinnati took on NYCFC at home. They scraped by 1-0. Could have been a little bit higher than that in terms of the goal scoring department later on in the game, and I don't think that scoreline fully represents how much they dominated NYCFC. But now that series shifts over to Citi Field in that unique kind of home field advantage NYCFC has. And then we had a 0-0 between the Sounders and Dynamo, which was pretty much on par for what was expected between two well-organized defensive teams. And Sounders ended up getting through on pens, so they take that series lead back to Houston. Columbus and RSL were the higher seeds in that final match day or day of the first slate. The final 2 games of these game ones, looking to continue what was before then a 6-0 start for the higher seeds in game ones. And we had the shock of the first set of games with New York Red Bulls pulling off a completely unexpected upset against Columbus Crew, the defending champs, might I say, with a 1-0 victory on the road, a place that the Crew just doesn't lose at all much in Columbus nonetheless, or they don't lose much, and Red Bulls looked like they completely had them figured out. Diego Rossi was missing in that game, and it was kind of clear how much they missed him in that with his playmaking, with his running. We'll get into that as we get into the previews for these second games in each series, but that was the first shock really of these playoffs. And then over in Utah, RSL and Minnesota battled it out. They had played a couple weeks prior to the playoffs, and that was a 0-0 in Utah. And then they had this same first round game, first game of the series in Utah, and Minnesota once again held it down, took their chances for the most part, got the better of the chances, I should say, and it ended up going to penalties. Only the one of 2 games, like the Sounders Dynamo, to go to penalties, and Minnesota pulled it off with a couple of misses / saves from Dane St. Clair down the stretch. So only 2 pure upsets in this first slate of games, and there's a lot of teams looking to close these series out 2-0. Others, like these ones that were upset, that have to dig deep and bring it back to game 3. And we're just going to go over series by series now as we preview these games too, what we specifically learned in these game ones about their styles and who's in and who's out, and how that's going to affect their approaches for these games too. So let's just get straight into everything you need to know for these upcoming weekend games from Friday to Sunday, which is a little bit less stretched out as the first slate of games. Let's get into what you need to know for these game 2s. So the first of these game 2s gets started with Charlotte hosting Orlando over in the East. This is Charlotte's first playoffs ever in their very short history, 3 years. And in that first game at Orlando, I think they just respected Orlando a little bit too much. You could see they were just in too deep of a block defensively, and I think it was more of that than Orlando really blowing the doors off them, and just it really just allowed Orlando's 10 Ojeda and the other kind of guys on that front line to just ping passes side to side, and they love crossing the ball. And eventually, one just slipped through, took a bit of a bounce or whatever, and or just got through, and you know they took their chance. It was Facundo Torres who opened the scoring later on in that first half, and he's kind of been the Charlotte killer, especially this season, and really once again has been in such great form in the second half of the season and now these playoffs. But I think for me, there's just no way that Charlotte can continue rolling out Świderski at that 9. I don't care if he's your DP. He just hasn't been that same presence that Ajimeng has been. And I think you could see once he got subbed in that he was already making those Orlando defenders a little bit more worried, and got a couple decent chances off crosses with some headers immediately. And I think he's just been a little bit more ruthless in terms of that goal scoring department when you really, really need him. And so I think Dean Smith is going to make the right adjustments in terms of that and the rest of the lineup. Obviously, you also have Pep Biel, your DP10, who got that late red card. Bit of a silly one, a little bit controversial, but regardless, he's going to be missing this one. And for me, I just don't think Charlotte is going to switch up and reinvent the wheel here. I think they'll not really feel the pressure because, once again, this is a game-by-game series, no aggregate type of stuff, and you just have to win. And obviously with the draw, it goes to penalties, but Charlotte's been incredibly good defensively the whole season. I think they won't take that same too passive of an approach that they did on the road in that first game. And I think they're still going to keep this one low eventful, but that's why in terms of this first best bet, we're taking Charlotte draw no bet. We get that push protection. If in case there's a draw, I don't see Orlando winning this one outright. Maybe forcing penalties, but I think Charlotte at home is a pretty good bet. I think, once again, Dean Smith will make the right adjustments. How you kind of fill in for Pep Biel as well. And yeah, I just don't really like Orlando's defense too much, especially on the road. I think Abada, Ajimeng, and the rest of that group, however Dean Smith wants to rotate it, I believe in that Ajimeng will start. And yeah, I think this team just takes a little bit of a better, especially attacking approach at home. And defensively, they're not going to let Orlando just completely control the game like that. As much as they hate possession, they're the least possessive team in the entire league with the least possession. I just don't think it's going to be on that type of scale where they sit in too deep. And I think they're going to take it to them. And even if this is low eventful, I think at the worst, we escape this with a push, and this might go to penalties. But Charlotte at home has been a pretty good bet this season, and I'm going to keep rolling with that. I think, especially with these lineup changes, like I said, I think this series has great potential to go to Game 3. I predicted Charlotte for this series, and I still like them in this spot to take it back to Orlando where they get a second shot. Next up on Friday's slate is Game 2 between Rapids and LA Galaxy, and this was the most lopsided scoreline, like we mentioned, 5-0 in that first game for the Galaxy at home, basically continuing their flawless form at Dignity Health Sports Park. And this has just been a complete mismatch, it seems like, for the Rapids all season. In the two regular season games they played as well between these two teams, Galaxy won 3-2 at home, and then later down the stretch of the regular season, 3-1 here in Colorado. And that has kind of almost started, or was towards the start of this kind of downwards projection and path for the Rapids going into these playoffs. And we just saw how meaningful Mihailovic was to this team, and how his absence affected this team. Bassett also not getting into the squad after a setback after he was expected to play setback in his recovery. We'll see if he goes here. I think he is expected to make it, but I think Mihailovic is also the one that is the more important of the two at that 10 role. And Rapids in that first game, 0.03 expected goals, only one shot in the entire game. Galaxy got that 1-0 lead off the corner at half, and then the second half just completely played into their hands, let Rapids have a little bit of the ball, and once they get out on that fast break counter, it's game over with Ricky Puig pulling the strings, and it was just embarrassing. They do not let off the gas pedal, and I just don't see how this goes back to Carson in California. Like, I think the Galaxy, as much as they've had their struggles on the road this season and inconsistencies compared to their, like I said, basically flawless home form, Mihailovic isn't going to be coming back. Bassett, like I said, could be coming back, but it just doesn't seem like they can compete on an attacking level, even with this altitude advantage here at home. Galaxy have already figured them out once, like I said, and that's where we're going with this next best bet. The first leg of it, the second leg is gonna include the Inter Miami Atlanta second game, which we'll get to next. But this first leg, I'm going with the double chance for Galaxy. So I think they at the very least take this to penalties, don't lose outright. They're still the favorites in this one, and the total is extremely high, sitting around a 3.5 towards 4. So they're expecting goals on both sides, but I think Galaxy can almost carry that. And I think, anyways, even if it doesn't, I think Galaxy feels no pressure in this game. It's basically all on Rapids to respond, and they're gonna try to go on the front foot, I would imagine. But I just don't see them having the creative pieces without Mihailovic to kind of unlock this Galaxy defense, which obviously hasn't been amazing, but still, I think they'll just kind of maybe sit in a little bit, make Rapids break them down, and I just don't see that happening. And I think they won't. I think they'll maybe be a little bit more passive, but they'll take their chances when they get them, and they can easily try and just sit on that and take their chances later if they're up. I don't think it's going to be too open of a game. They're going to keep things a little bit more cautious, and they have a chance to win this one outright as well, in my opinion, just based on that strategy that I expect. So I think this is very suited for Galaxy to close this one out. And yeah, this should be a pretty straightforward. I don't think they want to play more games than they have to. They want to get over it. And then the other series that is coinciding with them, who they might play in the second round if they advance, right, would be Minnesota or RSL, and that has the potential to go to 3 games. I think they want to get that extra rest, get over this, and not expend too much more energy than they need to. I don't think it's going to take a lot out of Galaxy, despite their road kind of inconsistencies in this one. I see probably like a 2-1 or something Galaxy win. So on Saturday, we have game 2 between Atlanta and Miami. In the first one, this was essentially all Miami, but it was only a 2-1 scoreline because of Brad Guzan's 10 saves. The 40-year-old goalkeeper for Atlanta just turning back the clock, and he had a lot of just literally pure one-on-one saves in open space against the Messi and a couple others. And he was playing a lot of sweeper keeper too, when Atlanta really needed to go for that tying goal in the final 15 or so minutes. And Miami tried to go on the break, but, Messi and Suarez 80 minutes in aren't the most energetic in terms of their pace. So he kind of got to a couple of those long balls ahead of time, Guzan did. And so anyways, Miami put up over the 3 expected goals mark. Could have been a much higher scoreline, and I think they're going to want to close this one out into, especially obviously with these older superstars they have. They have a younger group besides them, but I think they want to get as much rest as possible throughout these playoffs. Obviously, this is the only best of 3 series in the entire playoffs in terms of round by round. So they're just going to want to get through this. Atlanta, like I said, has had their number in a sense and played them very tightly. But I think when you give a coach like Tata Martino as well another chance at this team to figure out maybe why they didn't convert on some of their opportunities, or weren't as dominant at times in that first game, and especially against this old club in Atlanta. I think Miami can easily close this one out and figure out how to get ahead early. And there's just usually goals between these two teams anyways. It gets a bit back and forth at times. And also Atlanta in that first game suffered a couple pretty big injuries on an already thinner team. Stian Gregerson, probably their best defender, went out with I think some sort of hamstring issue. He hasn't been training in the meantime, so likely sitting this one out. You also had Brooks Lennon, one of your kind of wingers, but options. And so it's just an even thinner team. Their attack still is capable for goals, but I think Miami once again is want to close this one out. Obviously, you have the turf here, which in a usual situation would mean, in like when these two teams met later on in the season, Messi came on at halftime, and they usually play him and Suarez and the likes a little bit less on turf, but in a playoff situation should be starting. I think they're going to want to get this one over with as soon as possible. And so I think Atlanta's had their chances. They had their chance. Lobjanidze especially has just been literally possessed when it comes to playing Miami, and Atlanta in general, actually, like we talked about in the whole playoff preview show, has just been much better on the road than at home. They just feel a little bit more comfortable, and this is going to be a rowdy environment like it was in that last regular season game here between these two teams. There's going to be a lot of Messi fans and just Miami fans in general filling the stands, because Atlanta has had a big problem with that this season as they've kind of fallen off that cliff. And so yeah, I think Miami should have no problem kind of tinkering with things in terms of the tactics and stuff, and putting in the right lineup. And I think Atlanta, they've had their chances. I think they're going to go out in two here, and that leads me to two different bets on this game here. So let's go over the second leg of this two-legger that we had with Galaxy double chance. We're taking just the straight over 2.5. In this game, we get it up to plus 104. I mean, between these two teams, that's been basically a given every time they meet with Miami games in general. I think that's obviously a great parlay piece, and there should just be goals, especially if Miami goes up and Atlanta gets desperate. I just think there's going to be a lot of countering, a lot of fast breaks, maybe a little bit of back and forth. And so also, I'm going to put a little bit of a sprinkle here on the first half, Miami to score over 1.5 goals. We get that at plus 300, so I'm putting a third of a unit on that, and that gets us, you would win a unit. So I'm taking my risk on that. I think if Miami does want to get this done, they're going to want to kind of come out of the gates flying. They scored in 2 minutes at home in that first game. It looked like they were going to just completely fly, and then kind of stagnated. Obviously, Guzan had the game of his life as well, keeping that one lower scoring. So I think this is pretty good value for a team that just wants to eradicate what is already a very thinner back line. And so I think most of the goals are going to come from Miami in terms of that second leg we have for this best bet. But I also just wanted to kind of include this other kind of flyer I'm taking, because I think that's the best strategy for Miami going into this game, is just to kind of maybe limit the stress on Messi, Suarez, get it over with as quick as possible, and just make sure there's no doubt that this doesn't go to game 3. Moving on with another Saturday game, we got NYCFC hosting Cincinnati. Cincinnati won the first game 1-0. It was a little bit more dominant than that scoreline suggests for Cincinnati's side of things. But here we go back to Citi Field. NYCFC has this unique kind of baseball field advantage, very narrow pitch. And so usually that does tend to lead to a bit of less goals. But I think NYCFC has been especially dominant at home this year. Cincinnati, as much as we question their back line going down the stretch of the season, I also had that kind of feeling ahead of these playoffs that they would tighten things up and maybe not play so with so much risk, and that kind of was the case. And especially in that midfield, they pretty much dominated NYCFC. So interesting to see if Maxi Morales starts this one instead of how he got benched this past game, game one. How that changes things or might change things. But I think NYCFC is going to want to be on the front foot. Cincinnati could budge, and I think it's once again all the pressure's on NYCFC to get this one done. But I really have no strong feeling on how this might go. Cincinnati, like I said, has been, or especially in that first game, tightened things up, is treating it more like it should be treating it, a playoff atmosphere and type of tactics. And NYCFC, like I said, has just been a pretty a team that just goes on these different kind of swings and form. So have to favor NYC at home here, but Cincinnati looks like so far a team that has that experience against the younger NYC team. I think Cincinnati can pull this one off, or at least take it to penalties and put the pressure on NYCFC, maybe make them a little frustrated and then take their chances. But at the same time, we saw in Cincinnati that those forward, they, like I said, leading up to the entire playoffs, Cincinnati's forwards just haven't been delivering. They started like Kubo and Orejano as the two strikers, when one of them, Orejano, is like preferably a wingback, but obviously he likes to get very high up. But anyways, yeah, like you see how much lineup tinkering they're doing. I think in this series they can still get away with that. But maybe later down the line that's probably what's going to hurt them. But here, two teams that you really just don't know what you're going to get out of. But I'm going to take Cincinnati to get this one done in penalties. The last of Saturday's 3-game slate is Minnesota taking on RSL. And this was one of those two upsets in the first slate of games. Minnesota won on penalties after 0-0 in Utah. And, man, before this series, I did predict RSL to just get by Minnesota because of their home games for first, and also just the fact that I felt like this attack for RSL would maybe figure it out and have just enough against a sort of shaky Minnesota defense. But man, it's not just that Minnesota won that first game, and obviously that sets them up here to close it out. But like I said, that RSL attack just looks completely dead. Minnesota has just been, or especially in that first game, really made it a point to make RSL beat them on the wings, and just wasn't happening. I mean, they just didn't have enough. Arango hasn't scored a goal in God knows how long, and it just doesn't look good for them. Minnesota, I think, had the much better of the really high danger chances, especially down that stretch in the second half, where McMath made some incredible saves. But I think as well, Minnesota still has the far better keeper in this series as well. And McMath has had his errors on the same side as, on that same point, that he did have a great game to keep them from a upset in 90 minutes. But I think Minnesota closes out here. I think they've never advanced past the first round in their history. The 6 years, like we talked about before, the 6 years they have made the playoffs in their 7 previous, they went out in the first round. And the playoff format has changed a lot. It's been between like a 2-leg home and away series to now this best of 3 and so on. And in none of those formats or whatever, they have never won that first round of the playoffs. So I think this is a great opportunity here at Allianz Arena. It's going to be rocking. That Wonderwall is going to be going crazy. And I think they didn't even expend too much energy in terms of their lineup there, who they started. They brought on Oluwase and Hangbin Zhang very, very late on in that game. So I think they have more of the depth and the players in form on that attack to really cause RSL some problems. RSL will be getting Brian Vera back for this game. that center back who was suspended because he spit on a player in that final kind of regular season matchup between these two teams. And so he's going to be hearing it, assuming he should start from this crowd. And yeah, I think RSL has really let this one slip, and Minnesota has a really good opportunity to seize on this. All the pressures, I think, though, is going to be on RSL to get this back, and that might make them a little bit more expansive and take a little bit more risks. And I think Minnesota is happy to once again sit back a little bit, and they have kind of those types of forwards with Robin Lod also kind of pulling the strings to take advantage. And maybe this is also another kind of a lower scoring game, but I think Minnesota can pull this one off and take their chances a little bit more. I just don't see it for RSL. They just haven't figured it out since that transfer window turnover. All these different pieces, it just hasn't been lethal enough. Diego Luna has really been and looked like their only hope of scoring a goal in that first game, and it just didn't happen. So on the road here, I just don't like their chances, so that's why I'm going with Minnesota moneyline at plus 100. Really good odds, I think, for any home team in MLS to be getting them at a plus or even, But yeah, I think this series is done and dusted. As much as RSL is going to feel the pressure, I think it's also on Minnesota to close this one out, not let this RSL team get any sort of confidence and head back to their own home field. The first of Sunday's 3-game slate is between Red Bull New York and Columbus Crew. Red Bulls with the upset of the first slate of games, like we talked about. I mean, wow, I've never seen Nazi really get out coached like this in a sense, because I mean, honestly, it was just so simple for Red Bulls. They really made Columbus look like just the most uncreative team, with just taking their chances, really, really sitting in that deep block, continuing to make Columbus cross the ball in. And they did get a couple of, I'd say, a little bit like half chances, a couple very clear chances, but they didn't have the right people in those positions to finish them off. A couple substitutions that those players that came on who were put in those positions and didn't really deliver. So Columbus was really missing Diego Rossi as that kind of runner, chance creator that plays alongside Cucho. It looked like Cucho was just trying to drag this team to a goal, and really no one else on Columbus kind of seemed to have that same urgency. That was, I think, also the flip side of it. And I mean, New York took their chance on a corner, and they probably should have won by more, if we're being honest, because in that last half an hour or so, Columbus really just unloaded and sent it completely, and their that back line was basically at midfield, and Lewis Morgan had the most clear chance, tried to round Schulte, and completely messed up that touch when he could have just had a free goal, honestly, and maybe another chance or two for himself in that game as a whole. So I mean, Red Bulls are going to be feeling no pressure. I mean, they're at home here. The crowd's going to be rocking. The Crew are supposed to be getting Rossi back, according to just Nancy and how he's been progressing from his injury. And that's going to be a big deal if he does end up getting the start. I think he has to go here. And it was just a shocking game because you don't see the Crew lose at a lot in general, but at home to be also blanked, shut out is just incredible. And if Red Bulls pull this off, I mean, this makes Miami's path as well just even more, pretty breezy. So Red Bulls just are kind of just a bad matchup for the Crew. I kind of didn't expect this in terms of that first game, or at least Rossi being that central to the Crew's success. But I don't think many people expected it, but it is what it is. And now the Crew really have to show that urgency in game 2, bring this back to Columbus, because I think if that does go back, the thing going for the Crew is that Red Bulls expended so much energy in that final 20 minutes or so just defending, making sure they were doubling down in the right positions when Crew kept flipping the ball over, especially to that right side. And so they're just going to be super, super tired. So if it gets into kind of a same situation again where maybe it's tied or something like that and Crew really pin them in, I think, especially with Rossi having to feature or getting to feature as well, then maybe the Crew can you can do some sort of bet on the Crew in that sense. But it's just shocking to see the Crew as well, how the odds have flipped based on that one game. The Crew are not favorites whatsoever. And so Red Bulls will be, they'd be completely glad with penalties as well. So I think they're going to try to keep it low eventful as well, take their chances on the break, and see what happens again. But Crew are definitely in a desperate spot here, and this is definitely one of the most interesting game twos just based on the upset, the tactics, and who can really who's really going to budge first, and we're going to see what this Crew side is made of, because this is not how they expected to start their title defense. So I still think Crew get it done with Rossi, but it's definitely going to be sweaty, and I think we're going to see why they're the defending champs. Dynamo and Sounders go at it again after a 0-0 draw in Seattle. Seattle got the better of them in that penalty shootout on what I think was one of the last kicks that Houston missed completely, with Stefan Fry not even having to make the save. And this series goes back to Houston, where the Dynamo haven't even been all that good at home this entire season. Coco Carrasquilla getting the red card for a lot of swinging and kind of grabbing towards the head area after some altercation at midfield. And so Houston played the final at least half an hour of that game down a man. Were completely pinned back deep, but they're a team kind of built on that. They're very comfortable sitting in that low block, and they're very, very organized. And same with Seattle. I mean, there were literally just not many chances in that first game. Neither has the attacking players or especially the wing play to kind of challenge those defenders one-on-one and create space for themselves. So it's a lot of crossing. It's a lot of failed kind of balls over the top in some situations, but they also don't have the pace to get onto those. So it's just a complete grudge match. I did give the Sounders the edge in this series just based on the fact that they had this home field advantage to start with. And I mean, penalties are a separate game. I mean, you could call it luck or whatnot, but the home crowd got behind them, and now they're up 1-0. And I think Houston has to kind of be on the front foot, but the Sounders will also just know that without Carrasquilla, with Hector Herrera and Bassi kind of not at 100%, as you could see from that first game, they're just going to give Houston the ball, which they love to have, and they haven't shown once again that they can be dangerous and pick apart a well-rounded defense like Seattle. So this should probably be a lower scoring game, but if Houston gets desperate and is down or something like that, then you could see Seattle maybe running away with it. But I really have no strong edge in this game. It's really just going to be about who takes that one chance or two, because that's literally the only kind of action you're probably going to see, unless, like I said, Seattle or something gets a counter late, because they're not going to be in any sort of rush at all. Houston, I think, has to really take it to them, and I just don't see them advancing in this series or taking it to a game 3. I probably favor Seattle. It could go to penalties again, for all we know. Houston has just been a complete failure in terms of their effectiveness on the ball. The final of these game 2s is between Whitecaps and LAFC, and in the first game, honestly, Whitecaps had a say in it, at least in the early going, and Brian White, especially in the first couple of minutes or 10 minutes, gets a very clear-cut chance in behind the back line, beats Lloris with a shot, but it comes off the post. And there were a couple other chances for Vancouver in that first kind of 20 minutes where they could have taken the lead. They could have made it a completely different game plan had they taken the lead, but then LAFC eventually gets out on the counter, gets a bit of a, you could say, lucky penalty to be called, but you create your own luck, and against a team as clinical as LAFC, you have to be just as clinical and take your chances. Otherwise, you're not going to cause an upset. And there's just really nothing to talk about farther than that in terms of this series until we see that Vancouver can finish their chances. It just really hasn't been the case the entirety of these last 2 or so seasons when these teams match up. So yeah, I mean, LAFC, you've seen where they've been vulnerable, set pieces, especially with a great set piece team like Whitecaps, and sort of maybe the first couple moments of a game. But now the Whitecaps are desperate. They are back at home after that whole kind of debacle where they couldn't play their wild card game at home. So I'm sure they're glad to be back. But LAFC is gonna sit in a little bit probably once again. I was kind of a little dumbfounded by the fact that Pico didn't start in that first game. I think they put in Vite for him, so that left them a little bit less effective creatively, and yeah, I mean, what else is there to say? Just Cherundolo seems to own Sartini, and there's literally no reason to trust this Whitecaps team until they show it. And I think it's just going to be more of the same for LAFC. I think they should probably start Kamara in this one because, once again, Giroud just isn't on the same type of timing and everything when it comes to these passing sequences and everything that LAFC loves to do on the break. He's just not suited for that. And but they still seem to have been getting by right down the stretch of this regular season, and against very, very weaker opposition in terms of the seeding. So it's going to keep working out for them, I think, in terms of, these early rounds of the playoffs. And yeah, I mean, LAFC just finishes their chances, and sometimes it really is that simple. They're probably gonna take their chances. Bouanga's probably gonna produce another quality moment, and it's another kind of easy path or easy going in terms of this second game for LAFC. I just don't see what else Whitecaps can do besides simply take their chances, and they had their shot and they missed. So yeah, I think this one doesn't go back to a game 3. Thanks for tuning in once again, everyone. Make sure to like the video and sub to the channel if you've been enjoying this playoff content. And we got these game 2s on tap this coming weekend, Friday to Sunday, just as another reminder. I think it's kind of unpredictable with now these game 2s being played at the lower seeded teams' homes. So we could get around an even split of series that end 2-0 and series that go the distance to game 3. So no matter how many game 3s there are, because there's certainly going to be at least a few, I think that we'll definitely be doing a video on that, previewing and reacting to these game 2s like we did here. So make sure to look out for that one. And in the meantime, have a happy Halloween and Halloween weekend, guys. I'll see you in the next video.